All right, so tonight we're going to be talking about planting your own pollinator garden. So supporting birds and butterflies and bees and all kinds of things. And it really comes down to putting in native plants. What is a native plant? So a native plant is a plant that is grown in a certain region for thousands of years with no human intervention, as opposed to a non-native plant, which was brought into and introduced into a certain region, usually by humans, is how they travel around. And those non-native plants have not lived in a certain region for thousands of years. Our native plants, like you can see here, this is an example of just some plants that would grow in the oak woods, okay? So we've got that tall umbrella plant that's called mayapple. And then you can see these right now in the woods. They're opening up. And then we've got a little ground layer of, it looks like grass, but it's called Pennsylvania sedge. So these all kind of have lived in the oak woods for thousands of years. They've developed a nutrient exchange system with fungal connections in the soil. So these plants can transmit nutrients to oak trees and back and forth, and very complicated. They have a relationship. The non-native plants don't have that relationship. And it's not just a relationship with each other, but they have relationships with the native insects as well that have lived with them for so long. And so when you put the plants in, you support the insects. So that's awesome. So how do you know if a plant is native or not? I've listed a couple of resources right here. Bonap.org. If you say you're like at the nursery and you're looking at a plant and you want to know if it's native, take the Latin name. If you can, type that in your Google search bar and put the word bonap after it. So let's say I'm looking at a purple coneflower. I'm like, purple coneflower bonap in the Google search bar, and that's going to bring you to bonap. And it's going to tell you, it's going to give you range maps down to the county level where that plant is native to. So that's amazing. National Wildlife Federation's Native Plant Finder, that is really cool. You could type your zip code in and it's going to give you some different native plants in your area and how many pollinators those plants support. That's awesome. Illinois Wildflowers is an amazing resource. I will often Google a plant name, say purple coneflower, and then I'll put the word Illinois after it because I know it's going to bring me to that website, which gives you all the faunal associations. So like every insect that depends on mayapple and interacts with mayapple, it'll tell you. So that's so cool. And it's not just wildflowers, it's grasses and sedges and trees and shrubs and all kinds of stuff. All right, let's go on. Okay, so we know what a native plant is. What is a pollinator? So a pollinator is literally any creature that moves pollen grains from one plant to another. So it could be bugs, it could be birds, it could be, all bats in some regions. So it's all different kinds of things. The pollen grain, this is a picture here of a tiny little native bee on a pasque flower, which are extremely beautiful. Some of the earliest blooming native wildflowers out in the prairies here in Illinois. If this bee crawled in there and was like looking for nectar or something and accidentally gets covered in pollen grains, right? So then it flies to the next little pasque flower where it's trying to extract nectar from it potentially. And it accidentally will mix up the pollen grains, and those mixed up pollen grains that are joined together will fall down a little tube. And this is very simplified, where eventually those two pollen grains will go through a sort of germination phase, basically, and a little fruit is developed and a seed, basically. So that's like the super simplified version of what pollination is. But we want to provide the plants in order for this to happen. So why do pollinators care about pollination? Well, I don't think they really care like consciously, I don't know, but they do care about survival. So a lot of them are doing this to get nectar. And so they get food out of this. And nectar is just sugary water, basically, that the plant has created through photosynthesis, right? That's how the sugar is created in a plant. This is an example of a monarch butterfly extending their proboscis, or that straw or tube-like structure, down inside the plant to get nectar out. Nectar is sugar. It's explosive energy, which is important for insects to be able to fly away really fast and survive. They also get pollen. So some insects are visiting these flowers, not for nectar necessarily, but to get the pollen. Pollen is a great source of protein, fat, and minerals. And not all pollen is created equal. I hear all the time about how dandelions are so necessary for our bees in the early spring. And it's just straight up not necessarily true. If we all had early spring blooming native plants, that protein content of that pollen is way better, way higher than from a dandelion, which is a non-native plant. Okay, so anyway, they get these little pollen grains, which they kind of form into like a little pollen ball, and that's what they are feeding to their young. So they're provisioning their, a lot of times, underground nests with the little pollen balls there. And the crazy little white worm looking thing is the bee baby or larva that turns into a pupa or whatever, turns into a pupa, goes through metamorphosis, and then becomes an adult bee. Perfect. So that little pollen ball is what that bee larva is feeding on. Okay, so pollinators and birds as well, they need our help, you know, and I don't want this to be all doom and gloom. We hear enough of that on the news. So you can read these numbers here. Monarchs declining, bee numbers declining. This is a picture of a federally endangered bumblebee called the rusty-patched bumblebee. Birds declining. Why? Habitat loss. There's a lot of neighborhoods around. There's a lot of agricultural fields around. Chemical use. So that's like inordinate, inappropriate use of too much chemicals. And competition from non-native wildlife and plants. And you guys, this isn't going to be a very popular statement, but that can include the European honeybees as well, which are sometimes introducing disease into our native insects populations. So there's a lot of just things working against our local wildlife here, but you can help. You in your yard, you can help all of this in a very simple way. These monarchs would love to live in your yard. These rusty patched bumblebees are found in the Midwest here, in backyards and municipal owned sites that have native plants. That's huge. So when you put these plants in, these native plants, and it can be a small little garden or it can be huge, it can be whatever you want it to be. It's going to provide the food, the shelter. It's going to be a chemical-free zone generally, and it's also just going to be very beautiful. All right, so native plants can be appropriate for your front yard. Like this is an example here of a front yard, very narrow sidewalk garden, or they can be large and big and crazy. It's all up to you what you want it to be. So here's an example of a monarch garden, and you guys, here's like a secret. You put these plants in that the monarchs love, and there's like a million other pollinators that love them too and that are going to benefit. So it's great. All right, so let's talk about this garden. This is a very classic kidney shaped small garden. And it was designed by Ringer's Landscaping back when they still did that kind of stuff. And it was designed for one of our neighboring land trusts, Barrington Area Conservation Trust. There's some really good things that I like about this garden design. And I pointed it out in the front there where I wrote in red, great combo. That like fountainy grass next to that bright orange flower. Bright orange flower is called butterfly milkweed. That is a milkweed. So, okay, monarch butterflies can only lay their eggs on the leaves of plants in the milkweed family. So in the Asclepias family. So that one's letter B. If you look at letter B, Asclepias tuberosa. Perfect. That is a native milkweed. So you're going to find monarch butterflies all over that. And in this picture, that orange flower, that's butterfly milkweed. It looks like that by like the end of June, beginning of July, and it's gorgeous and it stays blooming like that for a long time. It's not aggressive. It stays under 3 feet. It has a nice upright habit, and it's a showstopper. Like it's just like bright, brilliant color. So I love to recommend this one for small gardens and big gardens too. And when you pair it with the plant that's right next to it called prairie drop seed, it looks beautiful. All right. And these grasses also support pollinators too. There's lots of different bees and other kinds of insects that will overwinter in the base of these grasses. So that's really important. And from a design perspective, you have a nice finely textured grass next to a kind of rough textured milkweed. They kind of balance each other out and they look beautifully together. Something else that I like about this design is that it has plants that are blooming from early in the summer until, well, they could have done a little bit better getting later into the fall. So I wrote their suggestions. I would add an aster in here to get some fall nectar. And I'm going to show you a picture of the aster I would recommend. I would also add a shrub for a varying like root structure. So the roots of all of these plants are different. And that's awesome. Variety is what we want because they're all going to occupy the below soil space in different ways. And that's what we want because then they can coexist. They're not going to compete with each other in a harmful way. So some of them, like those little purple coneflowers there, D, the pale purple coneflowers, they have a deep taproot. And then you take something like these grasses, like that prairie drop seed or the little blue stem, which is letter J, they have really hairy, fibrous, dense root systems that don't go necessarily as deep as some of the taproots. So that's great. They're all going to be extracting nutrients and water out of different levels within the soil. Cool. We've got diversity underground as well. I'm going to go over a couple other like really early spring bloomers that I would add to this too. And then for a small garden, they have Joe Pye weed in here. Eupatorium, it should be Eutrochium purpureum. Letter E, that's a tough one in a small garden. So I know people who have that one in a small garden and it seeds all over the place really aggressively. So if you're set on having this one in there, and it is a great, sorry, it is a great pollinator supporter, like the tiger swallowtails, just love it. If you want it in your garden, but you don't want it spreading like crazy, you're going to have to commit to cutting the seed heads off, all right, before they just start like blooming and flying all over the place. So if you're up for that kind of maintenance, then go ahead and put the Joe Pye in. Otherwise, I'm not up for that kind of maintenance. I don't like having to do that kind of stuff. So I don't put that in a small garden. I have that out in a bigger space. Okay. So there's a lot of great stuff in here too. There's 2 different kinds of milkweeds, which are both well-behaved milkweeds, the swamp milkweed, the incarnata, and the butterfly weed. Notice that it does not include common milkweed, which is Asclepias syriaca. That's a good thing. That is way too aggressive for a small garden. They spread by these underground rhizomes, like a thick thread. Imagine like a really thick thread that runs laterally or sideways. And they're just insanely aggressive in a small space. So the common milkweed, I wouldn't put that one in a small garden. H, that showy black-eyed Susan, that one's good too, the Rudbeckia. So we're going to go on though, because I'm going to show you some of my other favorites to include in a small garden for monarchs and other pollinators. Prairie Smoke, this is blooming right now. This is amazing for full sun. Okay. This, and you can see the close-up of the bee there hanging off that bloom. That bloom is what it looks like right now. Bees, these bumblebees, are the only ones that are strong enough to like get up inside. They wedge themselves up inside the bloom and they shake their bodies, and that dislodges the pollen grains. Okay, and they're able to take that pollen back to their nests. It's a really cool thing to watch and see. This is a great under 1 foot plant for like a sidewalk edger or something. And then you can just lay on your sidewalk and stare at this plant. Yes, I do that. In a month or so, like end of May, beginning of June, it's going to start to smoke. So you can see in the picture there, the bloom is fading and it's going to seed, we call it. So all of those fluffy wisps are called achenes, and down inside the plant, there's a tiny seed attached to each one of those. And that's where it gets its name from, Prairie Smoke. And I think it looks like a troll doll sometimes, but it's incredibly beautiful looking, especially when you've got a bunch of them. And, oh, you guys, this is what's known as a cool season plant. So it actively grows early when the soil temperatures are still low. And the air temperature is usually too, unless it's today and it's 86 degrees out. So I like that because guess what else grows a ton in April but weeds? So I want to get as many cool season actively growing plants in as I can to help block out weeds. And those grow pretty densely, which is nice. They don't spread aggressively. I wish they did, but they don't. And those leaves are there. If you dig down through the snow in January, those leaves are there, which is amazing. That's helping hold moisture in the soil. They're great for erosion control. This is just an all-around fabulous plant. Okay, butterfly milkweed. I already kind of talked about this one too much accidentally. That's a caterpillar. That's a monarch caterpillar there on the right, the black, white, yellow stripes. My butterfly milkweeds are covered in these monarch caterpillars. They love it. So this is a great one to use in any landscape. They need sun. They really like very dry soil. They could do medium soil too. They can do, when I say sun, I mean like 5 hours of direct sun. In the summer, so in like July, when all the leaves are totally out, between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., are you getting at least 5 hours of direct sun in there? If so, butterfly weed is a great one for your home landscape. And that butterfly weed is like early July. Here's a fall bloomer. So this is like September. This is an aster. So I told you guys I was going to give you an aster recommendation. Aromatic Aster. I love it. All right. So it is aggressive. Let's just put that right out there from the beginning. It is aggressive. But I've developed like some little tricks of how to hold it in place. So this one does spread by those underground rhizomes. Now, when you sandwich it in between bunch grasses, like prairie dropseed or little blue stem, the fibrous root system of those grasses stops the rhizomes. Awesome. That keeps it from spreading. Or maybe you just have a space and you just let it spread. all over the place, which is sometimes what I just let it do. This is fantastic for migrating monarchs. All right, in September when there's not a ton blooming, asters are really an important nectar source for them. And remember what nectar is, it's sugar. Sugary water, which is what these monarchs need as they are migrating from some parts of Canada all the way down to central Mexico where they overwinter. Okay. Oh, I also like this plant because it's covered in blooms. So it's gorgeous. Not just monarchs like it, but bumblebees like it too. And this is one of the only asters that does a mound-like habit. A lot of other asters, I'm not a huge fan of them in landscaping, like in a garden, because they're leggy and tall and weird looking. So until they're blooming. These aromatic asters look nice. They have a nice mound-like, almost shrub-like habit under 3 feet. So they look nice even when they're not blooming. They also look really nice even in the winter. So that's awesome. That's like a hero plant for me. When I get a plant that's like, you are going to look nice in multiple seasons and you're supporting all these pollinators and you're super hardy, like that's awesome. That's what I want. All right, so here's some of the grasses. I'm kind of obsessed with grasses, especially from a design perspective, because if all you have is like flowers in your design, a lot of times the flower textures of the leaves are just kind of rough looking, or I don't know. They don't have this fine texture to them that the grasses do. And the grasses really balance it out nicely. So ideally, your design is going to have a matrix of grasses throughout it. And these are just 2 different kinds of shorter, generally well-behaved prairie grasses for full sun. So I already talked about the prairie dropseed. This thing is amazing and it's so perfect for formal landscaping. It's like this perfectly circular fountain grass. It's gorgeous. It's not aggressive. The only thing is it takes a long time to mature. So if you buy like a little half-pint plug and you put it in the ground, it's going to take like 3 years or something to get to full size. Whatever, be patient. It's worth it. The little blue stem has phenomenal fall color. That is the color it turns in the fall and winter. It's amazing. Okay, especially in the late afternoon sun. Holy cow. It's like a russet, bronzy gorgeousness color. Winter interest, awesome. Also, there are skippers. It's not a butterfly, not a moth. It's like that little skipper, whatever. It looks to me just like a butterfly. Anyway, they lay their eggs on the little blue stem grass blades, and those eggs hatch out. Those caterpillars are able to eat the blades of the little blue stem. That's amazing. Okay, those are the relationships that we want to set up in our gardens. Like these insects that are like, I can only lay my eggs on Asclepias, on milkweeds. Perfect, where we need to put those milkweeds in. Okay, pretty much a lot of different native plants that you put in, they're going to support something. And that National Wildlife Federation native plant finder is going to tell you, what in your zip code, it's going to tell you what insects are being supported. And if you're local to Illinois, you could just go to Illinois Wildflowers too. All right, let's talk about shade, because we've been talking about sun this whole time. So let's talk about a shade pollinator garden. There's so much you could do in the shade. People are always like, I have shade, I can't support butterflies because I can't put milkweed in. Well, there are some milkweeds for shade, but first let's talk about this. So a shade garden can be tall, can be short, just like a sun garden. This is an example of a tiny little under 3 foot height plants for a shade garden right outside a front door. there's three main components to this garden. The ground layer, the very lowest ground layer is wild strawberry. I'm obsessed with it. I'll talk more about it in just a second. Yes, you will get actual strawberries from it. That's really cool. Jacob's ladder is the bluish purple flower there that's just above the strawberry. That'll be blooming in like, I don't know, a week or two around here. Gorgeous. It's so beautiful. It can do part sun, it can do shade. It's so low and moundy and just beautiful. And then there's wild ginger back there too, which is another ground hugging plant. And here are all of those in a more up close setting. So the wild strawberry there on the left, that's what it looks like in the fall, like November, I think I took that picture. It spreads by those runners that you can see there. This is the native wild strawberry. This isn't strawberry that you like buy in a cup at Home Depot. This is the native woodland strawberry. So you do get little strawberries off of it, and they are tasty. They taste really good. There's a lot of non-native strawberries out there. The non-native strawberries have a yellow flower. The native strawberries have a white flower. Okay. This plant looks beautiful in multiple seasons, basically every season. I think it looks great. And those runners, if they're going to stretch towards the sun. So if you only have a few wild strawberries to plant, I tell people plant them in the shade. They're going to reach out towards the sun. All right. So you'll get your plants to work for you that way. They cover the ground so densely, and they are evergreen, those leaves. So you can dig down in the snow in January and they're there. They cover that soil. They help suppress weeds, and they're just straight up beautiful. This is such a great alternative to like periwinkle or vinca or all of the like pachysandra, all of these awful non-native ground covers that do not support insects at all. People are like, oh, well, I see insects, landing on the flowers of my periwinkle. You know what? No, you need native plants. There are so many insects that are able to lay their eggs on the leaves of the strawberries, and then those little caterpillars are able to eat the leaves. That is what we want. They are also able to get nectar from the little white flowers, and there's some strawberry mixed in with that ginger up in the right there. You can see those white flowers. That's what the strawberry flowers look like. And wildlife is able to eat the fruits too. So this is this like trifecta of a pollinator wildlife supporter plant, and it's an amazing ground cover that can take light foot traffic. Okay, wild ginger up in the right there, so dense. It's amazing. There's a crazy little red flower that you can't really see in this picture, but there's a crazy red flower that's like down on the very bottom that is little gnats and all kinds of other critters are attracted to that. And then the Jacob's ladder is on the bottom. And let's see, I think, oh, I don't have it. Okay, so there are certain bees who can only get nectar from Jacob's ladders. So from things in the Pulmonium family. Same thing goes with things like wild geranium and bishop's cap. These are awesome little shade plants. Wild geranium can do sun too. So with wild geranium, those little andrena bees, they can only get pollen from plants in the geranium family, native plants in the geranium family. The halictid bees down in the bottom can only get nectar or pollen from the bishop's cap, okay? So when you plant these plants, you are helping a very specific insect. Now, other insects could be known as a generalist. A lot of butterflies are generalists. Some bees are too. They're like, you know what? My mouth parts can get nectar or pollen out of anything. So they can go to all of these plants and more. But then there's some little insects that can't do that. They can only get things out of specific plant families. Okay. So you plant for these specialists and you end up supporting the generalists too, which is pretty cool. All right. So let's talk about birds here. Everybody thinks they have to put a bird feeder out to support the birds, and that is one way to do it. But really, if you put these native shrubs in, those are the most amazing bird feeders that can also bring a ton of beauty to your yard. For example, service berries, and this is what they look like right now. They are blooming like crazy right now, and they're gorgeous. I recommend this shrub all the time. It could do sun, it could do shade, it could do dry, it could do medium. It's not going to be okay in like standing water. Okay. Gorgeous. Gets 20-ish feet tall. I don't know, 10 to 15 feet wide. So you got to have some space for it. And then later in the summer, it gets these berries on it. And you guys, the berries are so good. You can eat the berries from the service berries just right off that tree. They're super good. They're high in nutrition for all different kinds of birds. There's also certain kinds of birds that enjoy nesting in these understory trees. This is a cedar waxwing here. They love the berries. Grosbeaks, scarlet tanagers, cardinals, vireos, like all these beautiful, brilliant colored birds are really attracted to these berry producing shrubs, serviceberry being one of them. They also talk about bang for your buck here. They also support different insects as well. Lots of different kinds of insects. And this is just one example here. This little moth is able to lay its eggs on the serviceberry leaves. And then you see the little caterpillar down there is able to eat those leaves. And then guess who eats the caterpillars? But birds, who are feeding these caterpillars to their young, because the caterpillars are an amazing source of fat and protein for their babies. So if you don't have the caterpillars, you're not going to have the birds. All right. So this is the name of the game, you guys. Put these native plants in so we get these caterpillars. So many different things are supported that way. Here's New Jersey tea. This is a very low growing shrub. Stays under like 3 or 4 feet or so. It looks like this in like July, usually around 4th of July, end of June, beginning of July. It looks like this. Gorgeous, right? Well, it's kind of finicky. All right. Sometimes there's some years where it's like, no, I'm just not going to grow. Maybe a rabbit gnawed the base of me and I'm just not going to grow. Maybe my soil is too wet. Maybe it's just too rich of soil. Okay, this likes really nutrient poor soil, like super dry soil. I've got it in medium soil, which is like black topsoil, like loamy black topsoil. That's what it is. And they're a little finicky for me in that kind of soil. I do have rabbits that chew the heck out of them too. So here's what I've done. I just stopped putting them in like a focal point place. I'm like, you know what? If you're not going to grow this year, then other plants are going to cover you up, and that's totally fine. And then maybe you're going to resprout and grow the next year. Perfect. I love them. I've kind of just embraced their finickiness and am overjoyed when they actually grow, because these flowers are so beautiful. But talk about covered in pollinators. I don't even know what all the pollinators are. There's tons of gnats and flies and these iridescent blue wasps that don't care about me at all. You know, they're just like interested in the nectar, and bees and butterflies. And just, it's like, I have sat and just videoed this plant, and it's like a hive of activity around these blooms. So that's one of the reasons why I just kind of put up with it. You know, sometimes it doesn't grow, sometimes it does. All right. So dead wood is another interesting component that people don't necessarily associate with a pollinator garden, but it actually is. And you could do it in a way that's like decorative and designy, like incorporating some cool driftwood or something into your garden, or you just kind of leave some laying on the ground outside, whatever. Tons of beetles, which are huge pollinators. People like discount the beetles. Like, no, guys, the beetles are just as important. They're actually more efficient pollinators than the butterflies are. So the beetles, different kinds of ants, different kinds of wasps all use this dead wood. And that's really important. Some wasps will they have this crazy thread-like thing, it's called an ovipositor, that they will stick and jab down into the dead wood, and that's where they'll lay their eggs. There's all kinds of things that live underneath the dead wood. This is a mini ecosystem in and of itself, okay? So don't get rid of every single piece of dead wood. Okay, so maintenance. Let's talk about maintaining these native plant gardens, because people, I hear it often said that native plant gardens are low maintenance. And I just disagree with that. As the person who takes care of my native plant gardens, I can tell you that that is just not true. Now, it is true that as they get more dense and lush over the years, and if you've planted plenty of those cool season ground covers, the work does get less, okay? And I can weed a garden in like 5 minutes or something, but that's after many years of getting it to that point. So some maintenance tips in the meantime, because this is no different than like maintaining, you know, your hosta garden or whatever it is. I recommend that people plant densely. So when you plant your native plant garden, you need to plant at least one plant per square foot. And if you don't have the budget to do that, then plant in pods of densely planted areas, and those pods are eventually going to spread outwards. In nature, these plants are competing with each other. And remember what I talked about, how they occupy different places in the soil and everything else. That's what we want, and it's going to help suppress weeds as well. So plant densely, tip number 1. Tip number 2, use a hoe to do your maintenance. Don't pull weeds out by the roots. Now, the reason for that, and I know this is like totally going against everything your mom or your grandma taught you, you're creating a big old soil disturbance when you pull that weed out by the root. And guess what loves soil disturbance? But weed seeds. And so you're actually causing more weeds to grow. And that's not what we want. So I use a hoe, and this is, I did not come up with this. Like, I stole this out of a book from an ecological landscape designer. And then like my friend who's a horticulture guy, he does this method too. So you're just slicing the plant like a 1/4 inch or whatever below the soil surface. You're slicing it off, and it's very fast with a hoe as opposed to a trowel trying to pull it out. Therefore, you weed your garden much faster. Therefore, you are more willing to come back and do it again in a week, because no, you are not killing that weed, but eventually you are starving it, and you need to use the hoe when those weeds are small. If you let them get huge, then it's just really difficult to get them out, even with a trowel or whatever. So the hoe is fast, and it is extremely effective, and it minimizes soil disturbance. You can get a stand-up hoe. I use that Dutch hoe, whatever. It doesn't have to be that one. There's all different kinds. My friend likes one that's like a diamond-shaped blade. I like that one because it's got a push, and it cuts on the push and it cuts on the pull too. I use that for my new gardens where the plants are kind of spaced far apart because they're little. in my established gardens where everything is tight and like really dense, I use that small handheld hoe, which is like, I don't know, $10 or something on Amazon. Fabulous. Love it. So easy to just go through and you're like slicing things right below the soil surface. A couple neighbor friendly tips for your pollinator gardens: just maintain a neat edge. Don't let plants flop all over the place. It looks unkept. So maintain a neat edge, whether it's a cut edge, whether it's a mowed edge, whatever is easier for you. All right. Make it look intentional. And then we need to like dispel this myth that native plant gardens are weed patches. All right. And I think a lot of that has to do with plant choices and not maintaining them properly because you think you put the plants in and you walk away. That's just not the case. Okay. We need to take the weeds out and allow the native plants to spread. Leave your leaves in your gardens and leave your cuts. So leave stems standing. So leave the stems standing all winter, ideally, because then the birds and stuff are going to be able to eat the seeds too. And then come spring, people are freaking out. They all want to cut the stems down, make their gardens look neat. You can do that. If you do that, cut the stems and leave at least 15 inches at the base. All right. And they started doing this in Chicago's Lurie Garden, which is like an incredibly designed like space in the middle of Chicago in Millennium Park. And they started doing that with their native plants, which is really cool. And they put up some little interpretive signage too, because there are little insects that are going to overwinter inside those stems. So if you cut all the stems down, you're literally throwing insects away. They like the first 15 inches, I guess, of these stems. And also those overwintering insects are going to leave. Some now in April, some in May, some in June. It all depends on the species. And then other insects are going to come and they're going to reuse that stubble. Now, that stubble all ends up getting covered up by the plant as it grows. So it doesn't even matter to leave it there. And if they're all cut at the same height, the garden looks fine. Here's an example from Heather Holm, who I am going to have on my resource list. I'm going to show you some of her book titles. She's amazing. You should follow her on social media. That's a little bee butt there. A bee abdomen. A little carpenter bee kind of excavating its way down inside a stem. All right. So these bees use these stems. This dead plant material is so important. Those leaves too, all kinds of moths and stuff will have cocoons like disguised as a leaf, and it'll be in those leaves. Here's another one. If you want to know, like, are bees using my stems? I don't know. Look for this little excavated, it looks like sawdust. It's the pith, the inside of the stem that's been like chewed up and kind of kicked out of there so the bee can access. That's the kind of stuff we want to see. All right, so we run a program called Conservation at Home, which is basically you get some native plants in, you start to begin the process of removing invasives, you know, as it works for you. I do a site visit. I don't care if you have like 0 native plants. I don't care. I'll come over if you're here in McHenry County and advise you. All right. We walk around your yard. It's very informal. We walk around your yard. I answer your questions, give you suggestions, teach you about ID, send you extensive follow-up information. If you've got some native plants in your yard, you get a yard sign, which is really cool. Great way to talk to people about why you're doing what you're doing. If you don't have native plants in your yard yet, I don't care. When you do, I will give you a sign. Perfect. The fee for the site visit includes a 1-year membership to our nonprofit. And that is how we do the work we do, is through member support. Okay, we're not a tax supported organization. We're a nonprofit. There are other nonprofits who are doing this program in other counties and states as well. So if you can't find your conservation at home coordinator in your area, email me. I will hook you up with them. Okay. So this is just a really great program. It's just a great way to get advice and to like avoid mistakes and stuff. And if we all do a little bit, if we all put little patches of native plants in our yards, just think about all the pollinators that have these stepping stones of habitats and they're able to move around. Here are some resources, so much stuff. Where to buy native plants, how to order them mail order as well, and have them shipped directly to your house. Some wonderful books on pollinators, the connections between plants and insects and birds and all of that detailed in these. That book by Heather Holm, that Pollinators of Native Plants, love that book. I refer to it all the time. And it's so user friendly, like for anybody. You don't need a science degree to understand this stuff, okay? She's got little garden layouts in there too, which is really nice. And here's what I tell people about the garden layout situation. They like want an exact design, right? Where do these plants go? I tell them not to freak out about that. It's more about the plants you choose than about where you put them necessarily in the garden. I mean, it's sometimes as simple as like short stuff in front and tall stuff in the back. It's pretty much that simple as far as design goes. Get those like grasses, you know, mixed throughout the whole thing. So she does have some pretty decent little designs in there too. Just keep in mind, guys, these plants are going to move around. They're not going to stay still. They're not going to just like remain in your design. They're not going to. They're going to move all around. We want that. Embrace that discovery. Okay. Anyway, your local wild ones chapter, great resource. Find them too. That's a national nonprofit with local chapters. Their whole group, their purpose is like get native plants in people's yards and help them with that. Okay. We run a Facebook group called Learn, Landowner Ecology and Restoration Network. It's a private group. We moderate it, so there's no craziness. Post your questions. Post a picture of a plant, a bug, whatever it is, and knowledgeable landowners, restoration ecologists, botanists will jump on and help you and answer those questions. Okay. So with that, you sick of listening to me talk yet? I am, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box. Okay. I am going to look. All right. We've got nothing in the Q&A box. Let me look in the chat. All right, so I don't see any questions. If anybody does have questions, go ahead and email me and I will get back to you with those questions. With that, Katie, is penstemon a native plant? Yes, Roman, it is. And there's all different kinds of penstemons. So I would just recommend that you Google penstemon, which is Penstemon, and put the word Illinois after it. So penstemon, Illinois, and it's going to bring you to Illinois wildflowers. And you're going to see all the different kinds of penstemon and where they are native to in our state, which is wonderful. Which one is best for hummingbirds? Oh, there's Columbine is wonderful for hummingbirds. There's all kinds of, so hummingbirds like those kind of long drooping tube-like openings. So they like those. Columbine is a big favorite of hummingbirds. I don't know if I talked about that one. It's impossible for me to talk about all of them. So wild columbine, Aquilegia canadensis, I think is the Latin name. That's a really good one for hummingbirds. And that's a plant that's going to seed all around and it's real pretty and blooms in late spring. Okay. Let me see if we've got anything else. Oh, thank you, Katie, for putting that in chat. Perfect. Which penstemon is best for hummingbirds? I honestly don't know for sure. I just use the penstemon digitalis. I don't remember the common name of it. It's just white. Like I use that one all over, and I do see hummingbirds coming to that too. I think they're all gonna like all of the penstemons have a similar tube-like structure. So I could see hummingbirds benefiting from all of them, honestly. And again, you can go to Illinois Wildflowers, and under the faunal associations part, it's going to tell you every single critter that uses that plant. It's an amazing resource. All right.
Awesome. Oh, let's see.
Yeah, Carol. Yes, penstemon digitalis, foxglove beard tongue. Thank you. It's been a day. Somehow I can remember the Latin and not the common name. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate the questions, and I appreciate you attending tonight, and reach out with questions and visit your local library. They have a lot of these books.
Yay.